everybody, and welcome to the Paranormal Portal podcast. I hope you all are doing wonderful out there. Thank you so much for joining us today. We have an incredible show lined up for you guys. I'm going to introduce you to a wonderful man named Nomar Slevik, who is here to visit and tell us about his journey. A little background on Nomar. He is the host and creator of the I Want to Believe podcast. He's also a published author with several titles under his belt. Granite Skies is one, Otherworldly Encounters, We Only Come Out at Night, and A Strange Trilogy. And he is, of course, here to talk about also his latest book, which is UFOs Over Maine, the 10th edition. And it sounds incredible. And he's also a documentarian. He's created a documentary called Otherworldly Amour. So I hope you guys will join me in welcoming Mr. Nomar Slevik to the show. Nomar, thanks for coming on, brother. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, Brian. I appreciate it.
Oh, it's absolutely my pleasure. And we tried this earlier this week, but I had nothing but technical difficulties. So I really, really appreciate you making this work today and coming back and making it happen. So I've been excited to talk to you because, you know, being a fellow podcaster, that's pretty awesome anyway. But you certainly got quite a laundry list of accomplishments behind your name, which is really incredible. But it's kind of my one canned question that I start most shows with, but how did you get into this? Was there some event that brought you into this, or a general interest, or how did you get here?
I think so. I think it was an event, and it happened when I was like 5 years old.
Uh-huh.
And I was living in northern Maine, actually right at the tip of Maine. And my next door neighbor was Canada. Mm-hmm. And I had fallen asleep one night, and a loud bang woke me up in the middle of the night. And when I say middle of the night, I'm 5 years old. I don't know if that's 9 p.m. or 3 a.m., but something woke me up. Yeah. And I'm trying to figure out what it was. And then I start to hear like these little taps at my window. And I look over, and then I see the sky light up. And I was like, oh, a thunder and lightning storm. Like thunder must have woken me up.
Sure.
So I lean up in bed to look out the window and watch the lightning. And right below is the St. John River, and that was kind of like raging, And I was seeing, lightning strikes and the sky lighting up in the distance, and there were clouds. And after a moment, there was this really disturbing, jagged yellow line of electricity, kind of like a classic lightning bolt if you were to draw it,
Uh-huh.
And that's how my young mind perceived it. And that's like how my adult mind remembers it. But it was this jagged yellow lightning bolt, and it was stuck in a cloud.
Oh, wow.
And it didn't dissipate. And even at, 4, 5, 6 years old, I knew that lightning happened, really quick. But this was staying there, and there was electricity coming off of it, and there was booms associated with it. And I don't know if you've seen the moon at night sometimes, and there's a halo around it.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
There was a halo like around this thing, and it was just so strange. I didn't know what to make of it, but I just watched it. I'm 5 years old. I'm an idiot. I don't know what's going on. And I just fall back asleep. I wake up the next morning, go to the bathroom. And when I'm walking from the bathroom to my bedroom, I can see out my bedroom window, and the lightning bolt's still there. So
wow.
I ran downstairs to get my dad, brought him all the way upstairs to show him the lightning bolt, and it was gone. And so I was trying to explain, the night before and all that stuff. And he was doing the father thing, patting me on the head, like, yeah. But I must have been like really insistent and animated, because he had to like kneel down, get on my level, put his hands on my shoulders. And he's like, buddy, it didn't even rain last night. Like, I don't know what you're talking about.
Ooh.
Yeah. So, but again, being, 5, 6 years old, the next shiny thing caught my attention, and I forgot about it,
Sure. Right.
A couple of weeks later, I'm being woken up again in the middle of the night, but this time it's my dad. And he brings me downstairs, and I can see my mother like shoving my sister into her like winter clothes. And then she does the same to me and zips me up. And then my dad scoops me up, and we all go outside, and I'm like, what's happening? And I stick my head in his chest just because it's freezing. It's northern Maine in the winter. It's awful. and we're standing on the front lawn. And my dad kept saying, buddy, you got to look up, you got to look up. And so finally I take my head out and I look up, and I'm seeing these kind of crazy colors. There's blues and reds and stuff and greens. And it was the Northern Lights, the Aurora Borealis.
Right.
And it's actually the first and only time I've ever seen them. Like, they've been everywhere this year, and it's just always been cloudy over here. It sucks.
Sure. Yeah.
But the reason I tell those in tandem is I think it created a core memory at such a young age that weird stuff happens in the sky and I should pay attention. And so I did. And I always had a keen interest in things that seemed odd or strange. And my mother, at a very young age, A, got me into horror movies, but B, she would tell me ghost stories of a house she used to live in.
Oh,
and I would
wow.
be like, oh, I want to hear more. I want to hear more. And then I would go to school and I'd ask buddies if they'd seen a UFO or a Bigfoot or a ghost in their house or whatever. And then as I got into my later teens, I was like a sophomore in high school, and I started like collecting stories. A buddy would tell me something and I would write it down and keep that piece of paper. And I would look in the local newspaper after my dad had read it, and I would cut out any article pertaining to, a strange light was seen or, whatever. So that was just all unknowingly snowballing to my first book, which was UFOs Over Maine, that got published in 2014, but I started writing it, much earlier. And some of those stories are in that book, but long story longer, I think that was the catalyst, when I was 5-6 years old. I think that was the catalyst for my fascination for all things strange,
Yeah, absolutely. I think that that's an incredible first event. So when you experience that, it does seem, as you describe it, like it was a very intentionally there for you to observe, because the tapping first and then you looking and then seeing that, and it's persistently in the sky, but then when you bring someone else, boom, it's gone,
Gone. Yeah.
I find that fascinating.
Yeah, it was really weird. And I've reflected back on it. Again, when I was 5 or 6 years old, I forgot all about it, and then the other, the Northern Lights happened. But once I got to be a teenager, I was racking my brain because I was like, do I have my own stories? And I had some from the family, but nothing that was my own. Some from the family that happened in the house.
Oh,
But I was like, do I have anything that I remember? And so I was thinking back, and I remembered, oh yeah, that weird lightning storm. So I asked my dad about it, and he had no memory. That was 5 minutes
sure.
of his life, 15
Yeah.
years prior or 10 years prior. But yeah, interesting stuff. I don't know what to make of it, but
So in your interpretation, was that a UFO event, or was it something
years
else?
later, yes.
Okay.
When I was working on UFOs over Maine, and I knew I had this strange story
Mm-hmm.
in my notes, and so I was rereading it. I'm like, that's not a potential UFO encounter. I don't know what is.
Right.
My perception was different. Obviously, as a child, that might have been the only thing I could associate with a light in the sky is lightning.
Mm-hmm.
Or it was a screen memory, because it was kind of weird that I see it and then I get drowsy and fall asleep.
Sure.
I don't feel like any abduction had taken place. But of course that doesn't mean anything.
Right. Right.
It could have happened. I don't know,
Right.
but so reflecting back on it, when I started working on the book, I'm like, I feel like it was certainly unidentified. Was it aliens? I don't know, but
Right. Right.
it was certainly unidentified.
It's also interesting that you noted that there was booming with these lightnings
Yeah.
that you were observing, and yet nobody else was aware of it except for you. So that's I mean, it's not unheard of. Obviously, that comes up all the time, where experiencers see stuff, and then people that are, maybe right next to them don't, or, they sleep through it or something like that, even though it's this catalyzing, powerful event that somehow these other people just aren't able to observe it for whatever reasons. And I mean, we can only speculate, but it does seem that it was intentionally there for you. Or maybe that's because it started your journey into this, right?
Maybe so, or maybe I've always been open to it,
Yeah.
and it was somebody else's encounter that I observed, from
Oh, sure.
a third party observation. I'm not sure. I have looked back in New Fork, and when I had access to MUFON files, I would look back in those, and I never found anything for close to that time frame in that
Oh,
area.
sure.
That at least that sounded like my encounter. Of course, there's tons of encounters, but
Yeah. Right.
or sightings, but nothing that seemed similar where it was nighttime and stormy, and
Right.
so I kind of came up empty there. But
And those reporting sites, I think, are a valuable resource, but I don't think that they're a complete compendium either. I mean,
no,
in doing these shows for me, one of the great tragedies I think about quite often is the fact that I think there's a lot more experiencers out there with these different phenomena, but they'll never tell the story, and the story
yeah,
will pass with them, and that
yeah.
to me is an incredible tragedy, because I think we do stand to at least learn something, or corroborate other things through other testimonials as they come out. So
Yeah, and at the very least, historical documentation. It's a
yes,
part of what we're living through,
right,
and documenting the strange, in my opinion, is important. It's all part of it,
yeah,
and if I can have a part in that, that's good enough for me. And it's interesting what you're saying about these reporting sites. I think now more than ever, they're a little bit more irrelevant. People are going to social media.
yeah,
The millennials and younger are going to social media to report their sightings. And, I think I told you before we started recording that I added a little over 150 encounters to the 10th anniversary book. And, geez, 25% of those came from contacting people from social media sites, because I saw their posts about,
oh, neat,
a sighting that occurred, and
sure,
yeah, so reports will come out almost year over year where sightings are down here, sightings are down there, sightings are down here. But what these news sources are citing is a New Fork or a MUFON, and it's
mm,
because people have moved away from that.
right.
Besides the boomers or elder Gen Xers, maybe. But
Yeah. As you've been reporting on, let's just say for the UFO phenomena specifically, do you think that there is these intelligences, and I don't pretend to know whether they're extra dimensional, extraterrestrial, or where they're coming from, but they're clearly here. I've got an experience of my own. I've got a few experiences of seeing UFOs, but one was very profound and right in front of me, and it was very, very powerful. But do you think that they potentially are always here, or do you think that they visit here, or do you have a take on that?
that's a good question. I don't pretend to know anything.
Sure.
I feel like the longer I research this stuff, the more answers that I have.
Hmm.
And a big, I guess, pet peeve of mine is whenever I hear somebody calling themselves an expert on something, that's more like when I stop listening.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so my take on it is I feel like they've been here for a while. I don't know if they're always here, but I think at the very least, what I am comfortable saying is true is
Yeah.
that millions of people throughout, humanity
Hmm.
have experienced strange things, and they seem to be coming from the sky.
Hmm.
And you can't, you just can't deny that,
Right. Right.
but what is it? I don't know. Is it extra? Is it ultra? Is it,
Yeah.
who knows
Yeah.
what terrestrial it is, but yeah, so it's not a great answer, but
No, it's a
it's
fair
the one I
answer.
got.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I didn't expect you to drill into it and say, well, this is absolutely what it is. But I'm
Yeah, yeah,
just
yeah.
curious, because I do think that as we dive into these discussions with so many other people, and so many experiencers and stuff, I mean, we do get at least some rudimentary conclusions. And this isn't. I'm sorry if that sounds like a criticism, because it's not.
Oh, no.
I don't know the answers either, and I desperately would love to, because it does seem to me that potentially, at least with the UFO phenomena, potentially they've been here through the entire journey of mankind in some form or fashion. I don't know if, if potentially there was the old alien astronauts where they came and kind of taught people and steered the development of what's going on here, or what. I mean, I guess it's all possible, and maybe it's unfair to ask anyone to try to answer that, but it's just a curiosity to me. It's because
it is one of the age-old questions, if you will. But I think as far as like, I really want to know what's going on, but because I think I've relinquished that want, and instead have changed my focus to people's experiences and to the experiencer themselves. One thing that my focus has been on, I think at the very least the last 10 years or so, is the trauma that this can cause people. And even though I have trauma of my own, the catalyst was not extraterrestrial, but for some of these people it is. But we at least have that thing in common. There's a trauma thing, and I have learned some skills in dealing with my trauma, and with somebody, being a kind, non-judgmental ear for an experiencer, maybe, I can help them cope with what, they've been through. I'm not offering, therapy or anything like that, but first of all, a kind, non-judgmental ear is huge just to begin with. And some of the coping mechanisms that I've come up with is, to use your word, rudimentary. It's nothing outstanding or anything, but feeling like you've been heard is a big part of it, and being okay. This has become cliche, but being okay with not being okay. Like, not everything is great all the time. And that's just true in my regular life. I couldn't imagine being an experiencer with a traumatic event that you're trying to live with, but you also have to be a mother or a father and go to work and, and do all these things. I can't even imagine living with all of that. Even though I've had my own experiences, it's nothing as traumatic as what I've heard people tell me.
I agree.
And some people ask for answers, and to those people, the answer I typically give is, I don't know, but because you shared your story with me, I'm going to share it with a lot of other people. And somebody who's not willing to come forward yet, or is, wallowing in this depression or suicidal ideation or whatever it might be, they'll read your story and maybe not feel so alone. And I think that's pretty powerful for both of us, for researcher and experiencer, So that's trying to do my part there, Yeah.
And I agree. I've talked to many people that for whatever reason, they chose to contact me and to come on the show and share their story, which to me is an incredible honor anyway, because it's definitely it's a gesture of trust. And I think that's very powerful. But how many people, and I'm sure you've experienced this too, that you've talked to people and their response afterwards is like, oh my God, it feels so good to finally talk about this. So many people carry this stuff for decades, and it's like this brick they're hauling around and they don't know what to do with. And I think a lot of times experiencers feel incredibly isolated because it's like they've had an experience that they can't possibly quantify. And what do you do with that? You can't go to your normal friends that you might talk about, the transmission problem that you have on your truck, and then go, oh, by the way, I was sucked into an alien craft last night, because people just don't have that. I don't know. A lot of people don't have the scope to understand what that means. And outside of experiencers, it's hard to understand, but it is incredible to know that what we're doing is having these effects on people and helping them in their journey, at least to just get it out.
Yeah. And that's really all I can ask for at this point, and I would say more often than I would like. Sometimes an experiencer changes their mind, and I either won't get the story or they've told me not to publish it, which is fine, and I won't. Yeah. But hopefully there's still that, at least I got it out, sort of thing.
Yeah.
And with all of the craziness that's going on with the government and UFO disclosure, it's I think one good thing coming out of it is that people are feeling more comfortable bringing up their experiences, and that's always a good thing. So I can appreciate that portion of what's happening.
Absolutely. And I agree wholeheartedly. And prior to this kind of soft disclosure that we've experienced, anytime that any of this stuff was brought up in a mainstream media, it would be like tongue in cheek, like, oh, we're going to go over and talk to Phil, who's on location at the waterfront where a bunch of people saw a UFO. It's like this jokey kind of delivery, like, oh, here's the comic relief. And now people are actually presenting it in a much more, I think, respectful manner.
And it might be the first segment too, not relegated to like the close of a show or whatever.
Right. Yeah. Before the credits. Yeah, we're gonna
right.
Yeah, there is that. No, I think it's wonderful. So you've had a UFO experience, and is it just that one, or have you continued to have more experiences?
Yeah, I've continued to, and I really don't think I'm an experiencer in the traditional sense, like, because I don't feel like I've been abducted. I don't feel like the same things are coming to see me. I think, again, it goes back to that childhood encounter. And I knew at a young age, I got to look up, I got to pay attention, because weird stuff happens in the sky. So I just pay attention a lot.
Yeah.
Is why I think I see a lot of stuff. And again, even though I'm seeing UFOs, I'm not saying I'm seeing extraterrestrials. I'm just seeing stuff I can't identify.
Right.
I think there's been, at this point, 13 or 14 sightings.
Nice.
The next significant one were truly unidentified, maybe extraterrestrial, is not until my 20s.
Oh, okay.
And I was living in southern Maine at the time. And I had a roommate who was a big skeptic. Not that they like made fun of that stuff, but they didn't believe it.
Right.
And I had come home from work one night. So it's, early evening, like before 6 p.m. And I'm upstairs and I'm working in my computer room. And I hear my roommate come home, like slam the door and like run up the stairs. And then they like burst into my computer room. And I'm like, what's happening? They're like, there's a UFO outside. You got to go check it out right now. And I'm like, what? Oh, wow. And they're like, yeah, I was driving home and it was like following me, like, parallel. And I'm like, so I'm talking to this skeptic and they're like freaking out. I'm like, well, let's go look. They're like, I'm not going out there. And I'm like, okay. So I go out there, and the time frame, this was like what, 04-ish, something like that. So I go outside, and I live up on a hill at that time. And the main road is called Route 1. And right across the street from Route 1, which is down the hill, is my landlord's house. And then there's the water beyond it, ocean beyond it. And I get out onto the porch, and I see these two red lights with a white light in the middle hovering over my landlord's house. And it's above their house, like 100 yards maybe, Wow. And it's not moving whatsoever. The lights aren't blinking. This thing looks big. Like I can see that it's taking up over half the roof, size wise. And it kind of looks like a boomerang. Like the lights are, kind of like that, set down, and the white one in the middle is up higher. And I'm watching it. I'm just like, I didn't expect that. So I'm looking at this thing and I'm like, oh, I got to get a picture. But, it's 2004. I had like a Nokia brick phone in my pocket. So I pull that out and I take a picture and I look at it. It's just like the squiggly, like red line on a black background. It looks like hell. So I'm like, okay. So I'm watching it and it moves up diagonally, not very far, but just a little bit. It moves up. And then it stops again. And I'm like, oh, what's happening? And then it starts to take off again, just after a moment, a level trajectory down the road and like following the same direction my roommate had been driving. So I'm like, well, I gotta go follow it. So I get in my car, and my car faces the house. So as soon as I like ran down to my car, I lose sight of it because I'm now facing the opposite way. I back down, get onto the main road eventually, and start flying down Route 1. And I'm looking and I'm looking. I don't see it. I'm like, how can I not see it? I don't understand. It was just right there, you know? So just about a mile down the road is this bed and breakfast. I can never remember the name of it, but there's a field right next to it.
Uh-huh.
I'm like, I'll pull over to this field where there's like this unobstructed view of the sky. And I know I'll see it there. So I pull over, I get out, my head's just, you know, on a swivel looking for this thing, and it never shows up.
Huh.
So I don't know what the hell happened to it. So after, I don't know, an hour, maybe 45 minutes, I decided to go back home and, you know, I wrote everything down that I saw and got what my roommate saw. So my roommate was driving home from work, driving up Route 1, headed towards the house. And they said they saw this brightness to the right of them. It was on, you know, the side of the road, on the water side of the road. And it was constant. And they're like, is that the moon? So they finally just looked. And they saw the two red lights and the white light in the middle, even lower than what I saw it.
Oh.
And it was on like the side of the road, just above the treetops. And it seemed to be trailing them. You know, he didn't think they were being followed, but it was keeping pace with them.
Right.
And when they pulled into the house, apparently it stopped over my landlord's house, which is crazy. But that's what they saw in their experience. And it freaked them out. So they ran in to tell me.
Wow.
Yeah, that's what happened. That was pretty significant. You know, there was no blinking lights, no sound at all when I was outside at the time. Yeah, so that was certainly unidentified. And it made me lean a little bit towards more unknown as opposed to maybe man-made. I just don't know what the hell I'm looking at. I feel like it was a little bit more unknown.
Yeah. And generally, I often wonder about that too, because of course the whole TR3B argument, the reverse engineered craft that are being manufactured, and I don't pretend to know what to do with that. I mean, is it possible? I guess, but you know, if it is an experimental craft, I don't think that generally the U.S. or any country probably does their test flights over populated areas, you know, with,
you wouldn't think so.
Yeah. I just think that that's probably a big, red check mark on the report. It's like, no. Let's not fly over the residential areas. Okay. As we're testing this out.
Yeah.
But
like if something happened, you know, like just like it blew up or something malfunctioned and it crashed, you know, like that's a huge liability. Just speaking from that perspective, I don't think it's a thing they do.
Not to mention, but then it's like instant disclosure.
Yes. Right.
It's hard to cover that, especially in today's information age with the ability for people to communicate instantly across the world. The last thing I think, if it is an experimental craft that they want to do, is let people know about it, you know. But, you know, it's a fascinating experience for sure. Now, in all of the phenomena that you cover, do you find that you're more geared towards the UFO phenomena, or are you dealing with everything?
I do have a keen interest in UFOs. For the longest time, I have felt, this opinion has changed, but for a while I felt that UFOs were like the last frontier of the paranormal, something that's just truly unknown, you know. And I held on to that for a while, but you know, as I research other stories, I'm like, okay, well, nobody knows what the hell black-eyed kids are, and nobody knows what dogmen are, and I'm not convinced that ghosts are dead people, you know. So I have a fascination with all of it. My interest in regards to professionally writing about it has solely been UFOs. Now, within those books, I have shared ghost stories and werewolf stories and things like that, but the focus has been on UFOs. But I love it all. And the next book I'm working on is about humanoid encounters. And that's humanoids of all kinds, creatures to full-bodied apparitions, you know. So that one's going to have more of a gamut that to for me to, you know, play around with more instead of just UFO stories.
Yeah. I think it's interesting to me, and you know, I've told this story a bunch of times, so it's getting really redundant, but it is still very, very true that, you know, before I started doing this, I was like, well, I can do a show about this stuff. I know all about it, you know, because I've been fascinated by all this through the years. But then you start doing the interviews, you start talking to experiencers, you start digging into the deeper research on it, and you know what fascinates me, and also I find absolutely maybe even frustrating is the fact that there's so much bleed through on different phenomena, like so much like. Abduction situations can almost be indistinguishable from hauntings, or, you know, and you know, cryptid experiences can be very spiritual and even extraterrestrial in some instances. And it's like the lines for me have really blurred as I've dig deeper into this.
I completely agree. They've completely blurred. Like over the last 15 years, it's getting blurrier and blurrier. Like for me as a researcher, for a long time, I had the lenses of the UFO researcher, and I've been trying to chip away at them. Now, before I became before I started publishing books, anyways, I had a ghost investigation team, and we did a bunch of investigations for like 5 years. And so for a long time, I had like ghost lenses on, but with my interest in both, I'm like, I'm reading this story or I'm talking to this person, I'm like, this sounds like an extraterrestrial experience. Or I'm talking to this other person and I'm like, all of this stuff leading up to this encounter that you had outside, all of it leading up, like the week before, was all of this paranormal activity inside the house. And I'm like, I gotta chip away at these lenses. And so now I feel like I'm finally free of them. And I'm trying to see stuff as unbiasedly as possible through one big, you know, lens. And like, I think this all might be connected. I think they're all the same thing. I still don't know what the hell it is, but I'm pretty sure it's connected, you know?
Well, I have kind of a hypothesis about this, and
I would love to hear it.
Okay. So what I'm thinking is that the similarities might be that there's several different things going on in these situations, and they're very unique from each other, but perhaps they're utilizing similar mechanics to create the phenomena. Like I agree that a lot of ghost situations may very well not be what we usually understand as ghosts. Like they're formerly living people and they're stuck on our plane of existence. And that could be the case for some of it. But I think that perhaps we are surrounded by, you know, when you look at the full spectrum of things, like the light spectrum, the sound spectrum, there's a lot of things that we can't readily perceive, but perhaps they can exploit a similar mechanic in our plane of existence where they can make themselves known. And that's what we perceive as spiritual encounters. But perhaps these extraterrestrial or extra-dimensional entities are utilizing similar mechanics. And that's where the bleed through comes through, is because maybe there is a fixed set of opportunities that they can use to come into our experience. And perhaps that's why everything seems so similar, is that, you know,
that's like they're utilizing the real physics or the real mechanics of how this all works,
or the quantum
which
physics,
we're ignorant to. But that's really interesting, and I could get behind that. That's okay, interesting.
Cool. Well, I'm glad to hear that. I've only voiced that a few times, but I can't believe that they're all the same thing, but perhaps they have to utilize the same triggers.
Because you're right, they can be drastically different. You know, seeing a Sasquatch in the woods is very different. You know, waking up in a craft, you know, those are two very different things. But to get there, that might be simple, you know, similar. There's a sense of whimsy, a sense of sometimes even euphoria, a sense of strangeness. Everything gets quiet. There's a vacuum of sound, you know, it's all very, but those are what leads up to it. It's really interesting.
That is.
That's a good theory.
Oh, thanks, man. I appreciate that. But, you know, I think that's the wonderful part about doing, you know, interviews with everybody, actually, but especially other people like yourself that are really diving into this, trying to understand, and where we can compare notes and throw out ideas. And it's all conjecture and just, you know, theory, but
absolutely.
But still, we got to start somewhere. You know, the other thing I wanted to ask you is, As you've gone through this, and you mentioned about your lenses, so that, you know, this shows an evolution of your journey, but have you been absolutely surprised in your journey of diving into this stuff, how much you didn't know?
Yeah. Like I can still kind of remember pivotal moments like throughout. And like one of the first ones, I forget the age, but I'm probably 8, 9, or 10, and Unsolved Mysteries is on. Had to watch it. And they were doing a UFO story, and it was of the Allagash 4 that happened in Maine. It's a very famous encounter that happened in 1975. It's very similar to Travis Walton. It didn't get the fanfare that Travis did, but it's a very well-known case in the Northeast and in a lot of UFO circles. It's a really well-known case. Raymond Fowler wrote a book about him. But the first time I'd heard about it was Unsolved Mysteries, and they had the 4 guys on, and I couldn't believe that there was this crazy UFO abduction case that happened in my home state, you know? And so that was a pivotal one. Like, oh, this can happen anywhere.
Right.
Okay, cool. It's not just the Bermuda Triangle or Washington State for, you know, Bigfoot or whatever, you know, or, you know, the Loch, you know, for Loch Ness, and, you know, like, oh, it can happen right here.
Right.
So that was kind of like the first pivotal one. And then they kind of just snowball after that, because as you do more research, you learn more stuff. I almost liken it to like a teenager now discovering the Who or something, and they go to their parent and be like, have you heard this? And like, yeah, the world has. welcome to humanity, you know. And you know, so I kind of feel that way with stuff that I've discovered. And I'm very now, and when I say now, probably the last 10 years, time is an illusion. So the last 10 years seems to encompass everything.
Right.
But, you know, now I'm very quick to be like, check this out. This can't be new. See if other people have experienced this, or have other researchers have been told this. And every time it's been the case. I've never discovered anything new. There was even a crazy, I can tell you the case if you want. It's the craziest thing I've ever heard. It's not like super duper intense. It's not an encounter with like a creature and somebody was abducted, but it's just weird. And okay, so I'll just tell you the story first.
Okay.
So this was 2018, I believe. And a gentleman was living in southern Maine. His parents are from northern Maine. Southern Maine's the most populated part of our state. So there's a lot of light pollution and all that stuff. So he was visiting his parents in northern Maine, and he loved to sit out on the lawn, smoke a joint, and watch the stars.
Okay.
So he's getting ready to do that one night, visiting his folks. So he's walking out onto the lawn, and there's like a bright flash from the sky above him, behind him. And he's like, what the hell is that? And he turns around and looks, and nothing. So he grabs a patio chair and he keeps walking. It happens again, but there's like this hissing sound or some weird electrical charge type of sound with it. So he turns around again, and he missed it. And he was like, oh, maybe it's like heat lightning or something. And so he turns around and he's like, now I'm just going to stand and watch, and I'm not going to miss it this time. So he's watching the sky when this really loud electrical type of charged sound is emanating like from above. And in the sky, this square starts to develop, and it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And it gets to the point where he's measuring it from celestial bodies, like, you know, the Big Dipper to whatever, to see how big this thing is. And in his opinion, it was down in our atmosphere, but it was miles wide and seemed to be like over a field that's a couple miles from his parents' house. But it's this large white square, and he cannot see the stars through it, but it looks like it's outlined. It looks like the sky has a square outline in it, almost like a TV.
Okay.
And again, this is all happening in just a few seconds. So this large square is in front of him. It's blotted out the night sky. inside of it. And then these white lines start to come from the borders of this outline and converge in the middle. And they get so tight and squiggly that it kind of looks like white snow on a television screen.
Oh, wow.
So it looks like he's looking at like some sort of static television in the sky. And he's like, what is, he's just gobsmacked staring at this thing. He's forgotten about the joint, hasn't even lit it,
Okay, that was my next question.
So he's staring at this thing going, what the hell is this? And then it's starting to get smaller now. And it's converging and closing and getting smaller. And it gets so small that it kind of snaps into a circle. So it's not a square anymore. It's a circle. It's like the size of the moon, how we see it in our sky.
Sure.
And, the little white snow is inside of it, and it's getting even more intense. And then just after a moment, it has like this final like hissing sort of sound, and it shoots off at an arc across the sky.
Wow. And
it goes out of sight. And now he's staring at an empty night sky, and he's scared. Like, what the hell did I just see?
Yeah.
Puts the joint in his pocket. He's like, okay, I don't need that. And he goes inside, and he can't stop thinking about it. He has a hard time sleeping.
Right.
Gets up really early, barely slept, and he decided that he wanted to walk to the field where he thought this thing was hovering over to see if he could find anything.
Right.
See if there's any remnant of this thing, because it's just so massive. So he sets off walking. Now he's in the field. He's crossed the road. He gets into the field, and now he's walking in the field. It's a huge field. The potato fields up there are massive. And he's about a mile into his walk when he comes across this burnt area of grass that's in the form of a check mark. And it's massive. It's not like it's a mile wide or anything, but it's pretty big, to the point where he couldn't even get the whole thing in a picture, from his perspective. Mm-hmm. Now, he did get a picture of it, and he said the phone got stolen while he was at work.
Oh, no. Okay.
So take that for what it is,
Sure.
But really nice guy, and seemed very believable to me. So, and basically that's his experience. And that's what happens with a lot of these sightings. It starts out great, the whole thing's crazy, and then it just kind of ends, and
right.
That's his story.
Yeah.
And it sucks, and I wish I knew more. And
yeah.
And he wishes he knew more. So I scoured far and wide to at least just try to find squares in the sky stories, not even cubes, because this was very two-dimensional to him.
Okay.
So I did find a few stories that were squares in the sky. None of them sounded anything like his, but at least it was a square. And in these stories, they acted more like portals.
Right.
In this one story, I think it was from Pennsylvania or something, this kid sees this square in the sky, but he can actually see creatures like looking at him through this portal, like looking down at him, and he's looking up in the sky and he sees them. And so that's interesting, which kind of reminds me of like Skinwalker Ranch, like from the book, where they saw like an opening in the sky and they saw dinosaurs on the other side or whatever. Yeah. But yeah, a weird friggin' story. I forget what your question was that got me to this story, but
just the evolution of it. But I think that's absolutely fascinating, and it makes you wonder, is that what was going on? My own personal experience, and I won't recant it. My first visual of a UFO was through night vision binoculars, and it was literally hovering right above a tree about maybe 100 yards from me up in the mountains here in North Idaho. And I was just blown away, because I've been looking and had never seen anything. And then I saw it, and I'm seeing it all in a green hue, and it's literally a flying saucer, but it's got panels between the upper and the lower segment, and they're flashing around in a chasing light pattern kind of thing. And I'm like, oh my God. So I'm like, I got to see this with my own eyes. And so I lower the binoculars, and there's nothing there but night sky. And I'm like, oh, took off. And then I raised them again. It's still sitting right there. Lower it. So I could only see it. I could only experience it in night vision, not with my eyes. And then I realized, my God, they can hide. They can cloak. They could be above your house and you wouldn't know it. And makes you wonder if what he was observing was hidden as well, but it, maybe did, maybe it did some kind of portal thing or whatever.
Yeah.
But he couldn't actually see the craft, but he could see the effect that it was having on the space around it.
Right,
So,
right. Like it was a portal that opened, but he just saw no crafts, and then the portal closed, and it,
yeah,
yeah,
exactly.
yeah. That's fascinating.
It
Fascinating.
is. It is incredibly fascinating.
And with paranormal investigations, there have been reports. It's actually happened with our own team back when we were investigating, where we saw something with. I guess the opposite happened actually.
Okay.
But we saw something with our own eyes, and then I held a night vision camera up to it, and it wasn't on screen, which was really interesting. So that's what made me think of that. But now that I think about it, it was actually the opposite.
But that's still pretty cool too.
Oh yeah, because it was cool to be like, oh my god, what the hell is that? And cool, let's record it. Oh,
right.
dang, yeah.
But it makes you wonder again about the whole spectrum, the spectrum again that we were talking about just a little bit ago. That we only can perceive a specific amount of spectrum,
Right.
But maybe these things, when they do maybe exist in a different spectrum normally, but they come into our spectrum, maybe they disappear from that other spectrum completely, whereas we can be seen in infrared, ultraviolet, and everything in between.
Right.
So I don't know. I don't know if that's a clue or a hint or what, but it is kind of fascinating that you were able to see it, but then through the equipment you weren't. And I find, I mean, it even though it's an opposite, I think it's incredibly relevant to that idea, of them maybe existing somehow vibrationally different than us, but if they're perceived in one range, they can't be perceived in the other range, and vice versa. I don't know. Well, I don't know what that means, but it's just my head working,
Yeah, it's crazy, and it's really fun to think about, and it's really fun to talk about, and it's really fun to experience.
It really is.
But it's crazy. It's crazy.
Well, the neat parts too is I like your disposition about this stuff. It's not that you go for this sensational version of it all. It's just you're just matter of fact in it, and you're obviously very well grounded in what you're doing, and
Thank you.
I appreciate that, because I think there's a lot of theatrics in this space, in whether it's printed media, whether it's videos, whether it's, verbal or audio, there's a lot of theatrics in so much of it. But I think for those of us that are really trying to understand the phenomena, the way that you're handling it sounds perfect to me.
I appreciate that. Thank you. I definitely don't feel perfect a lot of the time, which I mean, that's probably good.
Yeah. Right.
But I just know that I'm fascinated with it, and life would be a lot more boring without it.
Yeah.
Sometimes I don't understand why everybody's not like super fascinated with it. Like the Fresno Nightcrawler, like there's this walking clothespin. Like, how are you not fascinated by that? But some people are like, well, it's not real, it's stupid, and blah, blah, blah. And it's just like, people have preferences, and that's okay. But I just feel really blessed that I had this experience, at 5 years old. Because if I didn't, would I still be into it? I don't know. I hope so, but I don't know.
It is also interesting to note that it seems that the phenomena chooses the observer, in that it almost seems intelligent, and not.
Yeah.
I'm sure that it is, or at least in many cases is, but it does seem like it's meant for people to see. And I've always thought that maybe the reason, the bigger, more metaphysical reason for that is that maybe it's meant to teach us that we got a lot to learn,
Yeah, and it could be a form of universal disclosure or something, like getting us ready for some things, and that's also very, what do you call that? That's a slippery slope, because that's on the edge of like main character syndrome and like feeling like you're enlightened or something, because I definitely don't feel those things. But I feel like if we pay attention enough and we're just good people, meaning somebody tells us something crazy, we're not like F you, we truly like stop and listen, be like, wow, A, that's fascinating. B, like, yeah, what is that? I don't, let me do some research,
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't
I
know.
think it's an amazing journey anyway.
Yeah.
And I'm just really thrilled that you took the time today to come on and to talk with me, because I clearly we could have a lot of discussions and keep going and going and going. And
Yeah,
I
yeah,
hope
for
you'll
sure.
come back. I hope that
Absolutely. This is fun.
well, I really appreciate it, Nomar. And can you take a few minutes to let people know where to find your books, where to find your
Sure.
podcast, and how to stay in touch with you?
Yeah, the podcast "I Want to Believe" can be found at all wherever you get your podcasts. If you want to do a search for it, "I Want to Believe" with my name, Nomar Slevik, Slevik. It'll pop right up. And all my books are available on Amazon, but also you can go to my online store. Again, if you just type in Nomar Slevik in Google, everything is going to pop up.
Okay.
If you wanted a specific website to go to, allmylinks.com/Slevik will get you to all of my stuff, which is music and the documentary and all that good stuff.
That's right. And we should note that you're a musician as well. So that's
I
fascinating.
try.
Well, we all do, but
Yeah.
it's you're a man of many talents, sir, and it's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you today. So thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, same to you. Thanks so much.